The morning sun cast long shadows across London as thousands of people lined the streets, their faces filled with anticipation. It was May 6th, 2023, and history was about to unfold in Westminster Abbey. Charles Philip Arthur George, who had waited longer than any heir in British history, was finally going to become King Charles III in a ceremony that would blend ancient tradition with modern sensibilities. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was electric with nervous energy. Charles stood before a massive mirror in his private chambers, adjusting the collar of his ceremonial uniform. At 74 years old, he had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. The weight of 7 decades of anticipation pressed upon his shoulders as heavily as the ceremonial robes would soon rest there. His wife, Camilla, entered the room quietly, her own coronation gown rustling softly against the polished floors. She had chosen a beautiful ivory silk crepe dress designed by Bruce Oldfield, embroidered with wildflowers and nature motifs that reflected both her personality and Charles's lifelong passion for environmental causes. The couple exchanged a meaningful glance, understanding passing between them without words. They had weathered many storms together, and now they would face the ultimate public ceremony as partners. The royal family had been preparing for months, but the planning had actually begun years earlier. Every detail had been scrutinized, from the guest list that would include world leaders and celebrities to the music that would fill the ancient abbey. Charles had insisted on making the ceremony more inclusive than previous coronations, wanting it to reflect the diverse Britain he would now serve as king. Meanwhile, outside the palace gates, the crowd grew thicker by the hour. People had traveled from across the Commonwealth and beyond, some camping for days to secure the best viewing spots along the procession route. Street vendors sold commemorative items, from tea towels bearing Charles's image to replica crowns that children wore with pride. The atmosphere was festive, but underneath lay a profound sense of historical significance. Television crews from around the world had set up their equipment days in advance. This would be the first British coronation in the age of social media, and every moment would be broadcast live to billions of viewers worldwide. The ceremony would blend the sacred traditions that had been followed for over 1,000 years with contemporary elements that reflected Charles's vision for a modern monarchy. In Westminster Abbey, the final preparations were taking place. The ancient building had been transformed for the occasion, with specially designed carpets and decorations that honored both tradition and innovation. The coronation chair, which had been used for every British coronation since 1308, sat ready to receive its newest occupant. Beside it, the regalia waited under careful guard. The orb, the scepters, and, most importantly, St. Edward's crown, which would be placed upon Charles's head at the moment of his official crowning. The guest list reflected Charles's desire for inclusivity. Alongside kings and queens from around the world sat representatives from Britain's diverse communities. Faith leaders from multiple religions would participate in the ceremony, acknowledging the multicultural nation that Charles would rule. This was a significant departure from previous coronations and demonstrated Charles's commitment to being a king for all his subjects, regardless of their background or beliefs. As the morning progressed, members of the royal family began arriving at the abbey. Prince William, now the heir to the throne, carried himself with the dignity befitting his new position as Prince of Wales. His children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, were dressed in their finest clothes, their young faces serious with the understanding that they were witnessing history. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, looked elegant in a custom Alexander McQueen ensemble, her presence radiating calm confidence. The international guests represented a fascinating cross-section of global leadership. Presidents, prime ministers, and monarchs from across the world had accepted invitations to witness this historic moment. The presence of representatives from the Commonwealth realms was particularly significant, as many of these nations would now officially recognize Charles as their head of state. Back at Buckingham Palace, Charles took a final moment of solitude in his study. The walls were lined with paintings and photographs that told the story of his life. Images of his time as a young prince, his military service, his environmental advocacy, and his charitable work. Each picture represented a chapter in his preparation for kingship, a journey that had spanned more than 7 decades. The ceremonial schedule was precise to the minute. Every movement, every prayer, every piece of music had been rehearsed countless times. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, had spent months preparing for his role in the ceremony. As the spiritual leader who would crown the new king, he carried enormous responsibility for ensuring the sacred aspects of the coronation were properly observed. Security preparations had been unprecedented. Thousands of police officers lined the streets, while military personnel provided ceremonial duties and additional security. The Metropolitan Police had worked for months with intelligence services to ensure the safety of the numerous world leaders who would be present. Despite the festive atmosphere, everyone understood the gravity of protecting such a concentration of global leadership. The music for the ceremony had been carefully chosen to reflect both tradition and Charles's personal tastes. The choir of Westminster Abbey had been rehearsing for months, their voices ready to fill the ancient stones with centuries-old hymns and newly commissioned pieces. The organ, one of the finest in the world, would provide the majestic accompaniment that had echoed through countless royal ceremonies over the generations. As the appointed time approached, Charles felt the weight of history settling around him like a cloak. He was about to become the 40th monarch since William the Conqueror, joining a line that stretched back nearly 1,000 years. The crown that would be placed on his head had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, world wars, and the transformation of Britain from a medieval kingdom into a modern democratic nation. The procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey would take him through streets lined with millions of his new subjects. Each face in the crowd represented someone whose life would be touched by his reign. Children who would grow up knowing only Charles as their king, elderly citizens who remembered his mother's coronation 70 years earlier, and people from every walk of life who had come to witness this moment of national significance. The Golden State Coach, the same vehicle that had carried monarchs to their coronations for centuries, awaited outside the palace. Its ornate decorations caught the morning light, and the 8 gray horses that would pull it stood ready, their handlers ensuring every detail was perfect. This coach had carried Charles's mother to her own coronation in 1953, and now it would carry him to his destiny as King Charles III. The procession began with the thunder of ceremonial cannons echoing across London, their sound reverberating through the ancient streets and signaling to the world that the coronation of King Charles III was officially underway. The Golden State Coach emerged from the gates of Buckingham Palace, carrying the man who would soon be crowned monarch of the United Kingdom and 14 Commonwealth realms. Charles sat inside the ornate carriage, his expression serene but focused. The weight of anticipation that had built over decades was now crystallizing into this single, transformative journey through the heart of his capital city. Beside him, Camilla maintained her composed dignity, understanding that she too was about to be transformed from the Duchess of Cornwall into Queen Camilla, a title that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The streets of London had been transformed into a living theater of pageantry and celebration. Every lamppost was decorated with flags and bunting, while the ancient route from palace to abbey was lined with soldiers in their finest ceremonial uniforms. The household cavalry rode alongside the royal carriage, their polished breastplates gleaming in the morning sun, their horses stepping in perfect formation that had been practiced for months. Crowds pressed against the barriers, waving flags from across the Commonwealth. The diversity of faces in the crowd reflected the modern Britain that Charles would now lead. People of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs united in witnessing this historic moment. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, their excited voices adding to the constant murmur of anticipation that rose from the gathered masses. Television commentators around the world struggled to convey the magnitude of what they were witnessing. This was more than just a ceremony. It was the culmination of a constitutional process that had been unfolding since the moment Queen Elizabeth II had passed away 8 months earlier. Every protocol, every tradition, every carefully choreographed moment served to maintain the continuity of a monarchy while ushering in a new era. As the procession made its way through central London, the international significance of the moment became increasingly apparent. In countries across the Commonwealth, people were gathering around television sets, radios, and computer screens to witness their new head of state being crowned. From Canada to Australia, from New Zealand to Jamaica, millions of citizens were watching one of their own historic ceremonies unfold thousands of miles away. The military precision of the procession was breathtaking to observe. Regiments that had served the crown for centuries marched in perfect synchronization, their movements a testament to months of preparation. The band of the Household Division filled the air with music that had accompanied royal processions for generations, their brass instruments catching the light as they played melodies that stirred the hearts of everyone present. Inside Westminster Abbey, the congregation had assembled in a display of global power and prestige unlike anything seen in decades. World leaders sat alongside members of the British aristocracy, while representatives from every sector of society filled the ancient pews. The sight was both humbling and magnificent, a reminder of the reach and influence that the British monarchy still commanded in the modern world. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood ready at the altar, his ceremonial robes a symbol of the sacred nature of what was about to unfold. The coronation was not merely a political ceremony, but a religious one, rooted in traditions that connected the monarchy to divine authority. This spiritual dimension added gravitas to every moment, reminding everyone present that they were witnessing something far deeper than a simple transfer of power. The moment the Golden State Coach arrived at Westminster Abbey, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. This was the threshold moment. Charles was arriving as heir apparent and would leave as king. The doors of the carriage opened, and Charles stepped out onto the ancient stones that had welcomed monarchs for nearly 1,000 years. His ceremonial uniform was immaculate, every decoration and ribbon perfectly placed, but it was his bearing that commanded attention. Here was a man finally stepping into his life's destiny. Camilla emerged from the carriage with equal grace, her coronation gown flowing elegantly as she took her first steps as queen consort. The couple paused for a moment at the Abbey's entrance, allowing the gathered congregation and television cameras to capture this historic transition. Then, together, they walked through the Great West Door and into the sacred space where their lives would be forever changed. The interior of Westminster Abbey had been transformed for the occasion. Thousands of flowers created a garden atmosphere that reflected Charles's love of nature, while the ancient architecture provided a stunning backdrop for the ceremony. Every seat was filled with carefully chosen guests, each representing some aspect of a nation and commonwealth that Charles would now serve. The procession through the Abbey was a masterpiece of choreography. Charles and Camilla walked slowly down the nave, their steps measured and deliberate. The choir's voices soared through the ancient stones, their music creating an atmosphere of reverence and celebration that elevated the moment beyond the merely political into the realm of the sacred and eternal. Members of the royal family had taken their designated places, each understanding their role in this carefully orchestrated ceremony. Prince William, as heir to the throne, carried particular significance. His presence represented the continuity of the monarchy into the future, while his young children provided a reminder that this ancient institution would continue for generations to come. The international guests watched with fascination as British constitutional tradition unfolded before their eyes. Many represented republics or countries with different systems of government, but all understood they were witnessing something unique, a peaceful transfer of supreme authority conducted through ceremonies unchanged for centuries. The stability and continuity represented by the monarchy stood in stark contrast to the political upheavals affecting many nations around the world. As Charles approached the altar, The weight of history seemed to press down upon the entire assembly. Every person present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered for generations. The young children in the congregation would tell their grandchildren about being present when King Charles III was crowned, while elderly guests could remember when his mother had been crowned 70 years earlier. The ceremonial objects waiting at the altar told the story of 1,000 years of British history. The ancient crown that would soon rest on Charles's head had been worn by generations of monarchs, each bringing their own hopes and challenges to the role. The orb and scepter represented the temporal and spiritual authority that the monarchy embodied, while the coronation ring symbolized the marriage between monarch and nation. The atmosphere inside the abbey was electric with anticipation. Every whisper seemed amplified by the ancient stones, while the shuffling of ceremonial robes and the soft footsteps of the procession created a soundtrack to history in the making. Camera crews positioned throughout the building captured every angle of this unprecedented moment, knowing that their footage would be preserved for future generations to study and admire. Charles took his position at the altar, his face reflecting the solemnity and joy of the moment. Behind him, the congregation represented every aspect of the society he would now lead, while above him, the soaring arches of Westminster Abbey seemed to reach toward heaven itself. The boy who had been proclaimed heir to the throne at just 3 years old was finally ready to claim his birthright and begin his reign as King Charles III. The sacred ceremony began with a recognition, an ancient ritual that asked the assembled congregation to acknowledge Charles as their rightful king. Archbishop Justin Welby's voice rang out through Westminster Abbey as he presented Charles to the congregation facing each of the 4 cardinal directions. Sirs, I here present unto you King Charles, your undoubted king. Wherefore all you who are come this day to do your homage and service, are you willing to do the same? The thunderous response of God Save King Charles from hundreds of voices created an overwhelming moment of acceptance and unity. Charles stood with remarkable composure during this ancient ritual, understanding that this moment connected him directly to every crowned monarch who had stood in this same place throughout history. The recognition ceremony had been performed at every coronation for over 1,000 years, and now he was experiencing the same profound acknowledgement that had been given to kings and queens stretching back to medieval times. The coronation oath followed, perhaps the most solemn moment of the entire ceremony. Charles placed his hand upon the Holy Bible and swore to govern according to the law and to maintain the Protestant Reformed religion established by law. His voice was clear and strong as he promised to govern the peoples of his kingdoms according to their respective laws and customs, to cause law and justice and mercy to be executed in all his judgments, and to maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel. This oath represented far more than ceremonial words. It was a binding promise that would guide his reign for the rest of his life. Every decision he made as monarch would be measured against these vows, and the weight of that responsibility was clearly visible in his expression as he spoke the ancient words. The congregation listened in absolute silence, understanding that they were witnessing the foundation of a new reign being laid. The anointing ceremony that followed was the most sacred part of the coronation, conducted largely in private behind a ceremonial screen to preserve its spiritual significance. Archbishop Welby used oil from the Mount of Olives to anoint Charles's head, breast, and hands, connecting the new king to biblical traditions of anointing leaders chosen by divine will. This moment transformed Charles from prince to monarch in the eyes of the church, marking him as set apart for his royal duties. The anointing oil itself carried deep historical significance. It had been specially consecrated and contained olive oil from groves on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, the same location where biblical kings had been anointed thousands of years earlier. The use of this sacred oil connected Charles not only to his royal predecessors, but to the ancient tradition of divinely appointed leadership that stretched back to Old Testament times. When the screen was removed, Charles emerged wearing the simple white colobium sine donis, a plain linen tunic that symbolized his humility before God. Over this was placed the golden supertunica, a magnificent robe that represented his royal dignity. The transformation was both physical and spiritual. The man who had entered the abbey as heir apparent was being clothed in the garments of kingship. The investiture with the royal regalia followed, each item carrying centuries of symbolism and meaning. The golden spurs were touched to Charles's heels, representing knightly chivalry and the virtues expected of a Christian king. The sword of state was presented to him, symbolizing his duty to protect the realm and maintain justice, before being laid upon the altar as a sign that his power came from God and should be used in God's service. The armills, golden bracelets symbolizing sincerity and wisdom, were placed upon Charles's wrists by the archbishop. These simple bands represented the bonds between king and people, reminding the new monarch that his authority came with corresponding duties to those he served. The congregation watched in fascination as each piece of regalia was presented with its own explanation and blessing. The coronation ring, often called the wedding ring of England, was placed upon the fourth finger of Charles's right hand. This ring symbolized his marriage to the nation, a bond that would endure until death. The ruby set in the ring caught the light streaming through the abbey's ancient windows, a visible symbol of the passionate commitment expected of a monarch to serve his people above all other considerations. The orb, a golden sphere topped with a cross and encrusted with precious gems, was placed in Charles's left hand. This ancient symbol represented the Christian world, with the cross triumphant over earthly power. As Charles held the orb, he understood that he was accepting responsibility not just for temporal governance, but for upholding the spiritual values that had guided the monarchy for generations. The scepter was then placed in his right hand, representing his temporal authority and his role as the fountain of justice within his realm. The scepter's weight served as a physical reminder of the burdens of kingship, while its precious materials and intricate craftsmanship reflected the honor and dignity of the crown. Together with the orb, these items transformed Charles from a private individual into the embodiment of state authority. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. St. Edward's crown, the most sacred of all the crown jewels, was lifted by Archbishop Welby. This solid gold crown, weighing nearly 5 pounds, had been used for the coronation of monarchs since the restoration of the monarchy in 1661. Its arches reaching toward heaven symbolized divine authority, while the precious stones embedded in its surface caught and reflected light like earthly stars. As the archbishop slowly lowered the crown toward Charles's head, absolute silence fell over Westminster Abbey. Television cameras captured every moment as the crown settled onto the new king's brow, but no technology could truly convey the profound transformation taking place. In that instant, Charles ceased to be merely heir apparent and became King Charles III by the grace of God, King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and of his other realms and territories. The moment the crown touched his head, the abbey erupted in celebration. Trumpet fanfares filled the ancient space, while church bells rang out across London and throughout the realm. The congregation rose as one, their voices joining in the triumphant cry of "God save the King," that echoed through the stones and out into the streets where millions more took up the cry. Camilla's coronation followed immediately, conducted with similar solemnity, but adapted for a queen consort. Queen Mary's crown was placed upon her head, making her officially Queen Camilla. The couple now sat side by side on their thrones, crowned monarchs of one of the world's oldest continuous monarchies, their faces reflecting both the joy of achievement and the weight of responsibility that would define their remaining years. The Te Deum was sung by the combined choirs, their voices soaring through the abbey in praise and thanksgiving for the successful completion of the coronation. The music seemed to lift the entire congregation, creating a moment of transcendent beauty that elevated the ceremony beyond mere political theater into something approaching the divine. Every voice joined together in celebration of the moment when ancient tradition met contemporary reality, creating a bridge between past and future that would guide the monarchy into its next chapter. Following the coronation ceremony, King Charles III and Queen Camilla processed through Westminster Abbey wearing their newly received crowns, their faces radiating the profound transformation they had just undergone. The weight of St. Edward's crown on Charles's head served as a constant reminder of the responsibility he had accepted, while the congregation rose in respectful acknowledgement of their newly crowned monarchs. The homage ceremony that followed represented one of the most moving moments of the entire day. Prince William, now officially the heir to the throne, approached his father to pay homage as the first among peers. Kneeling before the newly crowned king, William placed his hands between those of his father and spoke the ancient words of allegiance. I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty and faith and truth to bear unto you, as your liege man of life and limb. So help me God. The emotion visible on both men's faces reflected the deeply personal nature of this public moment. The sight of son kneeling before father, prince before king, created a powerful image that would be remembered long after the ceremony ended. This moment encapsulated the seamless transfer of royal authority while highlighting the human relationships that exist within the institutional framework of monarchy. For Charles, receiving his son's homage must have been particularly meaningful, representing both personal pride and constitutional continuity. Representatives from across the Commonwealth and the wider international community watched in fascination as ancient British traditions unfolded before them. The ceremony demonstrated the remarkable stability and continuity of the British constitutional system, where power transferred peacefully through established rituals that had evolved over centuries. Foreign dignitaries observed protocols that predated their own nations by hundreds of years. The musical elements of the ceremony reached their crescendo during the final blessing. The Westminster Abbey Choir, combined with musicians from across the United Kingdom, performed pieces that had been specially commissioned for the coronation alongside traditional hymns that had echoed through these same stones for generations. The sound created by hundreds of voices singing in perfect harmony seemed to embody the unity and shared purpose that the monarchy was meant to represent. As the ceremony concluded, Charles and Camilla prepared for their transformation into their departure regalia. St. Edward's crown, having served its sacred purpose, was carefully removed and replaced with the Imperial state crown, a slightly lighter but equally magnificent piece that Charles would wear for the procession back to Buckingham Palace. This crown, with its famous Black Prince's ruby and other historic gems, was more practical for extended, while remaining deeply symbolic of royal authority. The imperial state crown had its own remarkable history, having been worn by monarchs at the state opening of Parliament and other ceremonial occasions for generations. Its 2,868 diamonds, 17 sapphires, 11 emeralds, and hundreds of pearls caught the light streaming through the abbey windows, creating a dazzling display that photographers and television cameras captured from every possible angle. Queen Camilla received her own transformation, exchanging Queen Mary's crown for the more practical George IV state diadem for the return procession. This adjustment reflected the practical considerations that had to be balanced with ceremonial requirements during such an extended public appearance. Both monarchs needed to be comfortable enough for the lengthy journey back through London streets, while maintaining the visual impact expected of a royal coronation. The procession from Westminster Abbey back to Buckingham Palace was even more elaborate than the morning journey. The newly crowned king and queen traveled in the gold state coach, an even more magnificent vehicle than the one that had brought them to the Abbey. This ornate carriage, built for George III in 1762, was a masterpiece of craftsmanship and royal symbolism that provided a fitting transport for the newly crowned monarchs. The crowds along the return route had swelled even larger throughout the day, as people who had watched the ceremony on television rushed to join those already lining the streets. The atmosphere was electric with celebration, as millions of voices joined in singing "God Save the King," while Union Jacks and flags from across the Commonwealth created a sea of color along the entire route. The military escort for the return journey was magnificent in its scale and precision. Representatives from all branches of the armed forces participated in what became a moving display of military pageantry that showcased the relationship between the crown and the military. Cavalry units rode alongside the royal carriage, their ceremonial uniforms and perfectly trained horses creating a spectacle that harked back to earlier centuries while demonstrating contemporary military excellence. International television coverage reached an estimated global audience of over 2 billion people, making Charles's coronation one of the most watched events in television history. Commentators struggled to convey the magnitude and splendor of what they were witnessing, while social media platforms exploded with images and reactions from around the world. The ceremony had successfully bridged ancient tradition with modern communication technology. The journey through London became a celebration of not just the new king and queen, but of British culture and history itself. Every street corner seemed to tell a story of the nation's development, while the cheering crowds represented the diverse, modern Britain that Charles would now lead. Children waved flags they had made in school, while elderly citizens shared their memories of previous royal occasions with younger generations. As the Gold State coach made its way through central London, the new king and queen acknowledged the crowds with waves and smiles that conveyed both their personal joy and their understanding of the moment's significance. Charles had waited longer than any heir in British history to become king, and the relief and satisfaction visible on his face reflected the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. The royal family members who had participated in the ceremony followed in their own carriages, creating an extended procession that allowed the public to see the institution of monarchy in all its ceremonial glory. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, despite their young ages, conducted themselves with remarkable dignity throughout the long day, providing glimpses of the monarchy's future. The return to Buckingham Palace marked not an ending, but a beginning. The coronation ceremony had been completed, but the real work of King Charles III's reign was just beginning. The crown that now rested on his head would remain there, symbolically, if not literally, for the rest of his life. Every decision he made, every speech he gave, every public appearance would be conducted as the crowned and anointed king of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. The success of the coronation ceremony sent a powerful message about the continuing relevance of the monarchy in the modern world. Despite predictions that royal ceremonies might seem outdated in the digital age, the global response demonstrated that there remained enormous public appetite for the pageantry, tradition, and stability that the monarchy represented. The ancient rituals had been successfully adapted for contemporary audiences without losing their essential meaning or impact. The arrival back at Buckingham Palace marked the beginning of the most anticipated moment of the entire day for the thousands of people gathered in front of the palace gates. The tradition of the balcony appearance had become one of the most iconic elements of major royal occasions, and the newly crowned King Charles III and Queen Camilla did not disappoint the expectant crowds who had waited for hours to witness this historic moment. The famous palace balcony, which had hosted so many memorable royal moments throughout the decades, was prepared for what would become one of its most significant appearances. As the doors opened and the newly crowned monarchs stepped out onto the balcony, still wearing their coronation crowns, a roar of approval rose from the thousands gathered in the mall below. The sight of the imperial state crown catching the afternoon sunlight created a spectacular visual that photographers and television cameras captured from every conceivable angle. King Charles III stood at the center of the balcony, his bearing reflecting the transformation that had taken place throughout the day. The man who had woken up that morning as heir apparent now stood before his subjects as their crowned and anointed king. Queen Camilla beside him carried herself with newfound dignity, her own crown gleaming as she acknowledged the crowds with graceful waves that conveyed both personal warmth and regal authority. The working members of the royal family joined the king and queen on the balcony, creating a tableau that represented both tradition and the future of the monarchy. Prince William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales, stood with their children, providing a visual reminder of the continuity that the institution of monarchy represented. Prince George, as second in line to the throne, carried particular significance as he waved to the crowds alongside his grandfather, the king. The flypast that followed was a magnificent display of British military aviation that served as both celebration and demonstration of the nation's continuing strength. Aircraft from the Royal Air Force, including historic World War II fighters alongside modern jets, flew over Buckingham Palace in precise formation. The sight and sound of dozens of aircraft passing overhead created an emotional climax to the day's celebrations that left many spectators in tears of joy and pride. The Red Arrows, Britain's world-famous aerobatic display team, provided the finale to the flypast with their trademark red, white, and blue smoke trails painting the sky above London. As the colored smoke drifted across the palace, King Charles III looked up with obvious pleasure, his expression reflecting both personal enjoyment of the spectacle and understanding of its symbolic significance. The planes had literally painted the sky in the colors of a Union flag, creating a patriotic display that perfectly captured the mood of national celebration. Inside Buckingham Palace, the coronation reception brought together world leaders, Commonwealth representatives, and distinguished guests from every sphere of British society. The state rooms, decorated for the occasion with flowers that reflected King Charles's environmental interests, provided an elegant backdrop for conversations that would shape diplomatic relationships for years to come. This gathering represented one of the largest assemblies of international leadership in decades. The conversations taking place throughout the palace reception reflected the global significance of the British monarchy in the modern world. Commonwealth prime ministers discussed the future of their relationships with the crown, while international leaders expressed their congratulations and hopes for successful cooperation during King Charles's reign. These diplomatic exchanges, conducted in the afterglow of the coronation ceremony, established the tone for Britain's international relationships under its new monarch. The evening celebration extended far beyond the palace walls as communities across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth held their own coronation parties and gatherings. From small village celebrations to major city events, millions of people joined in marking this historic day. The success of these grassroots celebrations demonstrated the continuing connection between the monarchy and ordinary citizens across the realm. Television coverage of the coronation continued into the evening with analysis and reflection on the day's events. Royal historians and constitutional experts provided context for what had been witnessed, while ordinary citizens shared their reactions to having witnessed the first British coronation in 70 years. The consensus was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators noting the successful blend of ancient tradition with contemporary values that had characterized the entire ceremony. Social media platforms remained active throughout the evening as people across the world shared their experiences of watching the coronation. The ceremony had successfully reached across generations, with young people posting enthusiastically about the spectacle they had witnessed while older viewers shared comparisons with the last coronation they had experienced. The global conversation continued long into the night, demonstrating the continuing relevance of the monarchy in the digital age. For King Charles III himself, the evening provided the first opportunity to reflect privately on the transformation he had undergone. The crown that he had worn throughout the day's public celebrations was carefully stored away, but the responsibility it represented would remain with him for the rest of his life. Every future decision would be made as king rather than heir, fundamentally changing his relationship with the nation and Commonwealth he now served. The success of the coronation ceremony sent a powerful message about the stability and continuity of British institutions in an uncertain world. While many nations struggled with political upheaval and constitutional crises, the United Kingdom had demonstrated its ability to conduct a peaceful transfer of supreme authority through ceremonies that connected the present to over 1,000 years of history. This stability carried implications far beyond ceremonial significance. The coronation marked not just the beginning of King Charles III's reign, but the start of a new chapter in the long story of the British monarchy. The institution had successfully adapted itself once again to contemporary circumstances while maintaining its essential character and traditions. The ceremonies of May 6, 2023, had demonstrated that ancient rituals could still speak powerfully to modern audiences when conducted with sincerity and dignity. As night fell over London, the newly crowned king could look back on a day that had exceeded all expectations. The weather had remained favorable. The crowds had been enthusiastic and well-behaved, and the ceremony had been conducted without any significant problems. Most importantly, the public response had been overwhelmingly positive, suggesting that his reign was beginning with the support and goodwill of his subjects. The crown jewels were returned to the Tower of London under heavy security, where they would be displayed for the millions of tourists who visit them each year. But the real crown jewel was the successful coronation itself, a ceremony that had strengthened the monarchy's position and demonstrated its continuing relevance in the 21st century. King Charles III had waited 70 years for this moment, and both he and his subjects could be satisfied that the wait had been worthwhile. The legacy of the coronation would extend far beyond the single day of ceremony. The images and memories created during those few hours in Westminster Abbey would be treasured by generations of British citizens and Commonwealth subjects. Children who had watched on television would tell their own grandchildren about the day they witnessed the crowning of King Charles III, ensuring that the magic and meaning of the occasion would continue to resonate long into the future.